So welcome to this Pivot Chats episode. I'm really, really excited to have Manisha Tare here with me. Manisha and I have actually known each other for several years in the entrepreneurial space, and we just recently reconnected. We have some interesting people in common. We don't even know where we met. We must have met in a Facebook group or something years ago. But right. But I think it's so interesting to have someone who has, to be in business long enough to have people kind of come back around in different ways. And we've never actually worked with each other, but we've just always sort of been peer level support in different ways for each other. So I'm really excited to have her here. And I actually, full disclosure, reached out to her saying, like, I think you would be really good. Manisha has a podcast. And I felt just, we connect, and I appreciate your work. And I reached out to her specifically and asked her if she would be interested in being a Pivot Chats guest, and come to find out that she's just recently made some mini pivots, if you will, in her business. And so the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Manisha has a podcast called the Transform Your Relationship podcast. And she's an embodiment coach and a mentor for highly sensitive women. And she does a lot of somatic work, which I just personally geek out about. So welcome, Manisha, to the Pivot Chats. And
thank you.
Welcome. Would you like to just more formally introduce yourself and just tell people what you do before we jump into the...
Sure. Yes. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's so funny how we meet in one place and like years later, we're like, wait, which group was that? Or what person or what? But it's really cool to even see all of your pivots too.
Thank you.
Just get to chat about that. But yeah, I am an embodiment coach and mentor, and there's a little story about even that title that we'll share in a little bit. But some of my background is, my education and degree is in occupational therapy. I worked with kids for a really long time. I transitioned to working with adults after I studied a modality called craniosacral therapy to like really help people heal their nervous systems. And initially, I was working with adults around kind of healing their bodies, like working with anxiety. And then I like really got into trauma work and really recognizing that, we hold so much of our old trauma, but also like emotion experiences that we haven't processed our emotions in our bodies. And so I just like started seeing this influx of people where I was kind of shocked at like how much they were holding as we started working together. I had been a yoga teacher for several years at that point, and so I'd been working with the body for a long time. But just to see and experience people's like release and feeling of lightness when they release this like old experience that they didn't even know they were hanging on to is like so powerful for me to witness and to help facilitate. And even though I was working in person for quite a while doing this body work, I transitioned pre-COVID into an online practice and kind of took all of my somatic practices and knowledge and background into working with people online. And that's when I kind of pivoted or refined. I like to use the word refine a lot.
I like
also.
that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Refined and kind of niched into working with more people who are highly sensitive. And to be honest, I think probably almost all the people I worked with were highly sensitive, but I don't think I like really understood that or knew that. And so as I got to understand more of that quality within myself and really start to see it highlighted in other people, that just became really the focus. I work with men and women, mostly women, but highly sensitive women, to help them, regulate their emotions, understand their nervous system, set boundaries, be able to take care of themselves in a way that feels good, and ultimately communicate their needs and express themselves in their relationships, because that's where the biggest challenge seemed to be.
That's where we play it all out, right? And well, one of the ways that we play it
One
all
of the
out.
ways, yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that too, because I think, I appreciate so much the way that you introduced yourself. And I think it just kind of occurs to me as I'm on this mission with Pivot Chats to normalize this experience of, it can be the entrepreneurial journey, but it's also just your career journey and the journey of, doing the work that quote unquote you're meant to do and how that evolves and changes over time. But the way that you even introduced yourself was like, I do this and this is how I got here, or like, this is what I used to do. Like I used to describe, introduce myself and say like, I used to do this in corporate and now I do this as a coach. And I find that happens a lot. Now I kind of want to go back to some of these other Pivot Chats. Like I bet you a lot of people, I feel like I often hear people introduce themselves and their work in some sort of progression, sort of here's the past, here's the current, which is so fascinating. And again, to just like, I just want to sort of like shine a light on that for a quick second. That's only a tiny bit of what we're here to talk about, but I think that too is quite typical. And I think we often, don't give ourselves credit for the journey of the pivot, or, we think we're doing it wrong, or like, oh my God, here I go again kind of thing. And like, just to, again, to normalize, just, even the way you articulated what you do, you also talked about like how you got interested in it, or how it sort of evolved into what it is today until it evolves again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And I also find it really interesting, just as a little Me Too moment, like I actually pursued occupational therapy, thought I was going to become an occupational therapist. I did that during the last few years of my corporate career, thinking that's what I'll sort of blend into doing next. And also became a yoga teacher and started working with people in their bodies, and also realized that I wanted to work with what was underneath the surface. And it just manifested differently. And I realized I wanted to do more mindset work and that type of, I left the physical space, although it's all holistic, but I just think that's so interesting, because I didn't actually know you were an occupational therapist. For pieces we've talked, I didn't know that about you.
Yes, that's so fun. Yeah, because I was like, I don't think I've heard you share that, but if you didn't know that that's what my degree was in, you probably wouldn't have shared it. So that's super interesting. Yeah.
But it is so interesting, I think, to see like the industries or the modalities or the areas of work and practice that people can be attracted to, and then how that takes you to the next thing. Like neither of us, do that now, and yet yours looks a lot more like it than mine. Then that's all normal and typical. Anyway, as an aside, so I'm actually I would love to start out, because I know you've gone through multiple pivots, and I think one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is because you've gone through more than one. You've been in business for some time, and you even said when we met, to set this conversation up, you kind of started to call them like mini pivots and refinements, and like, okay, now this, but I'm not changing to become like, something completely different, like an accountant, but I am noticing there's that next step or that next level or that next iteration of this work that I really want to do. And even today, you mentioned to me that you've landed on a new title for yourself. So I'm curious sort of where your head is with that. And I thank you for being open to being this transparent, because we've all tried different titles on. And I think there's, again, I just want to normalize that, that what you called yourself a year ago may not fit. And you might need to call yourself something else later. And that doesn't mean, there's something wrong with you, or you haven't figured this out yet, or what have you. It's just the nature of the game, I think. So how did you get to this? Because I love it. Embodiment coach and mentor for highly sensitive women.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. And I didn't share this with you right before we jumped on, but the reason that so I guess I'll just start with, I don't even actually remember what I was calling myself literally 24 hours ago. I think it I know.
Doesn't matter now.
It doesn't matter. But my focus has always really been somatic healing, like no matter what I was doing. And then we also crossed over in the intuitive world when we both studied the Akashic records at different times. And I always felt like, well, yeah, I'm also using my intuition. So the focus had always been like somatic and intuitive healing, which felt really good in the sense that like, okay, this is like literally what I feel like I do. And I really like to, I think that sometimes online we see these titles and we're like, I don't even understand what that means.
Yes.
What is this person doing? You know, so I think I kind of went the more concrete route of like, okay, this is literally what I do. So this is what I call myself.
Yes.
But I also don't think that people know what that means either.
Totally.
Also kind of vague,
Totally.
even though it was like very clear to me, right? But also kind of vague because a lot of people don't know what somatic healing is, and super quick 30 seconds is
Right.
like, when you're doing somatic healing, you're working with the body. It can look a lot of different ways. I personally practiced yoga and craniosacral work, which is like nervous system work. Other people might do it in other ways. I now practice a modality called inner relationship focusing, which is something that you can do a little more easily online, but or virtually, I should say. But it was just, I was like, okay, I don't think people really get what I do when I say that. And then I like work with people on their essentially their core issues or inner child wounding or early childhood trauma to help them heal that, because they might be noticing it showing up in their relationship in current time. Like if they're always feeling rejected by their partner, but their partner's not really objectively doing anything to reject them. It's like, oh, what's going on there with me? Like, what do I need to look at and really process in my body to get to this place where I'm not carrying this like old pattern or old wound around? And I was like, I don't think people really get that from somatic. like, why would they understand that? So anyway, this whole iteration has been happening, and I thought, well, I focus on relationships, so maybe I should call myself a relationship coach. But I'm like, that doesn't really make sense because I work really on the relationship we have with ourselves. And it just kind of connotates like a relationship with another person. So I was like, well, that doesn't feel right, you know? So I was very like mental about it in the sense of like, how do I do this? And then or whatever day it was that we were speaking, and then you said, oh, I'm posting your information on my website so that when we have the conversation. And I think when I took a quick look, you had put under there like appropriately somatic healing and whatever it was, somatic healing. And I was like, oh, I don't think that's not right anymore.
That's not me anymore. Like that's not it.
I was like, that's not the right way to say this. And so I just was like, what is this? And so I kept thinking embodiment, and I think we've talked about human design a little before. And so I'm a manifesting generator, and I know it's a very long answer to your question, but I'm a manifesting generator, and part of my strategy is to respond. And so I have been really learning, like if I want to change something or have an idea or something, I just kind of put the idea out into the world, and then I see what comes back. And literally after I had this thought and I was like writing it down and kind of playing with it multiple times, like I opened an email, I saw a post, I saw whatever, and it kept saying embodiment, embodiment, embodiment. I was like, okay, I think this is
paying attention.
Paying attention. And then when I really thought about it, I'm like, that makes so much sense. Like every single thing I've done in my like training and education and professional life has always been about helping people come back to their bodies, to connect back, to ground, to connect into their intuition because they feel grounded, to be able to show up as themselves, and you know, all of those things, be able to like feel clear enough and trust their gut and be able to speak for themselves. And so I was like, oh, this is it. So here we are.
So I love it. And I'm curious, how does it feel? Because I think today, like I was saying, introducing you this way for quote unquote, the first time, Like I almost want to joke and be like, for the first time, ladies and gentlemen, like, but I
reveal.
do find, I didn't, yeah, exactly. Like I didn't read your, fancy pants official bio.
Yeah.
But like, if I were to have, right. Or the way that how did it feel for you? Just like hearing it.
Yeah. It felt really right. Like I was like, oh yeah, that's who I am. And then I do now remember, I think at other bios or podcasts I've been on, people, I think what I have given people is that I'm like a somatic healing practitioner, which also is incredibly accurate. Because that is like literally what I am, I guess. But this just felt like it took it deeper, because it encompassed more than the somatic work, like the sort of virtual somatic work. It sort of takes into consideration literally all my training from like undergraduate, right? Like I studied anatomy and physiology. I have worked in a cadaver lab and literally like cut a body open for my own learning, and so grateful for the humans that donate their bodies for this. And so I'm like, this is literally what I've been doing since I was like 20, and like, yeah, this is it.
I love that. And even when you told me right before we hit record, you told me, and it was like, you were talking about like grounding your clients and working with people in their bodies. Like, I just felt like the energy grounded. If like, that's the only way. I don't even feel like that's quite the right way to say that, but it's like, that's the only way I can come up with. It just felt so grounded to hear you say it. And it's almost like I was talking to somebody else recently who's pivoted and said, what I'm choosing to do now is like my greatest hits. It's like the culmination of everything I've always done, but like I left the stuff I didn't love anymore and I just brought the rest with me. And we're talking about it in the form of a title, or the way you speak about your work and articulate it to other people. But that's the other, like, as you're saying it, it's like, this is the title that you maybe could have worn all along in different ways, maybe, but also it's really you now, as a practitioner, as a person. It just really encompasses everything.
Yeah. And I like that you said, I mean, it's true, because I think that's probably true for a lot of people, like the shifts in their title, like, I think just encompass more and more of what they're already doing. I mean, sometimes certainly it could be like, oh, I'm doing this totally other thing. But I think more so it's like a deepening of, and kind of bringing it more into like the holistic space of like, oh yeah, okay, this is like all of what I'm doing, not just like this one piece of it. So, and I guess the other thing I would just say about that real quick is that I think that, on one hand, I was like, oh my God, Manisha, why are you spending all this time like on a darn title? Like, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, like what, like, why is that so important? But then I thought, words carry weight and they have power 100%. And you're transmitting literally a message. And so they're the frequency of the words. So, not that I would suggest to somebody like spend all your time trying to figure out what to call yourself, but like when you're noticing that or when it's coming up for you, like there's something to that.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I agree. I have a client who every time she pivots, she refreshes her photos on her website because it just feels right to her. Like, okay, now it's like, this is the sort of physical representation, if you will, even though your website's not physical, but like this is the representation of my new chapter. And I just want to have that new energy, because if I look at a photo of me from a year ago, when I was doing, this minus 10%, or the 10%, the 2% shift that I made in the last year, is something doesn't feel quite right. And so I agree with you. Like, yes, we can get in our heads and spin and, use it as a really beautiful form of procrastination and self-sabotage to focus on something that we want to pretend. Our brain wants to pretend and tell us is important. But and there is absolutely a moment when that's completely appropriate. And I completely agree with you. And I've been playing around with my title lately too. And I'll let you know where I land.
Yes.
I may keep mindset and
Please
business
do.
coach forever, but something doesn't quite feel accurate to me anymore. Like, again, I do mindset coaching and I do business coaching, but it's not wrong. But it just doesn't feel quite right. And like you said, like when it comes up, and I often will say to my clients, like, it's one thing to have a thought once or twice, you know, it's another thing to go, this keeps coming up, or every time I see that title or the, you know, signature line on my email, something starts to feel weird. It's just not right. Then like, then, you know, you're probably onto something legit.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. But, and I also think like one of the things that you just said is like, you know, I'm sitting there like, Manisha, come on, like, this is really not, you know, the best. And I think this is where my mission for these pivot chats is to help people go, okay, I'm not great. How long have you been a business, like an entrepreneur?
Since 2011 or 2012.
Yeah. So
in various capacities. Yeah. It's been a long time.
Am I doing math
10,
right?
yeah.
9 or 10
Yeah,
years?
10 years. Yeah.
Right.
10
And
years.
so for those of you who are new entrepreneurs, and, you know, everything is a challenge, I think, in the beginning, and you just have to kind of pick something and go with it and then let the rest flow. But like, I think there are moments where I have these conversations with myself about like, seriously, Laura, we're going to look at this title again. Like, I've been in business for 5 years and I've probably had 3 or 4, maybe more. I don't even know how many titles I've given myself. And I think when we do pivot, sometimes there is this judgment that we have around like, hold on. Like, I did that in the beginning of my business. I shouldn't have to do it again. Or I shouldn't, you know, if something's wrong with me, if I'm doing this, you know, this thing is happening, why can't I get it right? And I think, again, while for sure there are moments, and I try to call my clients out on it when they're like focusing on something that like has long been established and is not a problem right now. There are those moments where we can do that, but there are moments where this is absolutely what needs to be looked at, and, you know, not necessarily agonized over, but also to just let it come and make a change. Let the change change itself. Let the title change itself when it's ready.
Yeah.
And you do kind of go back to that beginner's, not beginner entrepreneur, you know, but there are moments of, you know, when you add when you evolve into the next chapter, there is a newness to it, and there is a refresh.
Yeah.
You know, that's appropriate.
And in some ways it can even be like a simplification, right? Because I think we overcomplicate. I do all the time. My brain loves to overcomplicate like anything it possibly can. So it really, I think sometimes when you land on something that feels right, and you know, it's funny because I'm like, oh, embodiment. It's like, even when I saw the website with that thing, I was like, that's not right. Like, I felt it in my body. I was like, that's not right. I was like, we need to change. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And like you said, I mean, you are such a true like practitioner of your craft, because you just said the way you felt it in your body. But you know, for people who do feel things, not everybody is aware of that. I think, but when you are a person who feels things in your body, I always am really grateful when I have those moments, because I really know when when I don't have a hit from my body, okay, whatever. But like when I do, it's like, okay, this is very real. You know, you don't always know what to do with it, but it's a clear sign, a clear message to pay attention to. And that's what you do, which I love. I'm curious. Well, the only other thing I wanted to say about the title, and then I want to make sure that before we shift that you didn't have anything else to say, but I also loved how you talked about it as a deepening. Because I think that's also what we do. You know, so much of your work has been in the same ballpark, right? If somebody is looking at you from afar and doesn't quite know what you're doing, like they might miss they might have missed the pivots that you've gone through in the last
Totally. I agree.
9, 10, 11 years, right? Because you know it, right? If you're in it and you know it, but it doesn't necessarily, you've stayed, generally speaking, in the same ballpark, even though it might probably doesn't feel that way to you. You've been in person, you've been online, you know, but really at the end of the day, it's just the next layer, the next iteration, the next evolution, the next, to use your word, refinement of your work. And then that's the deep. So to hear you say the title also feels like a deepening, there's something there resonant to me in terms of just the work and the refined title.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that.
I like it. Anything else you wanted to say about the title? Because this is like super fresh and as of right this moment.
I don't think so. I mean, I hope that I guess I just hope that it like lands for people, or they, you know, they see like some piece of that for themselves that's useful, you know.
And also, you know, not to detract from the groundedness that you're feeling in this, but also to normalize this process. Like, we're putting this out into the world. Somebody could be listening to this. Like, we're recording this in November of 2022. Somebody could be listening to this in November of 2024, and or even in January of 2023, like TBD, whether that, you know, whether at that moment your title is your title. And I just want to make that so super normal, as opposed to Manisha can't get this right. Laura shouldn't change her title every year. You know, it's just, let it, you know, again, not to like overspend time on things that aren't relevant, but especially when you're shifting and pivoting, or when you start to notice something over time doesn't fit. Like, you saw it on my website and you're like, that's not me today. Letting yourself, giving yourself permission to follow that.
Yeah, because I wasn't like sitting around being like, oh, I don't want to write a sales post, let me try to change my title. Like, I just happened to look on your website and I was like, oh no, that doesn't feel right, you know. So I think that's like another thing to think about, right? Like, are you distracting yourself from something, or are you just like living your life and you see something, you're like, oh, that doesn't feel right. Let me get curious about that.
Exactly. In our very first pivot chat, Allison talked about how she had gone through multiple pivots in her business, but this time it was such a quiet, it was like a small whisper, but she just knew, because she had been doing this, you know, she knows herself, and she just said, oh, okay, I got to listen to this. It was like just a tiny dip in fulfillment for her. It was just like oh, that doesn't make me as excited as it used to be. Like, there's not a problem there, right? And paying attention to that. And that's, I feel like that's kind of what you did, is you're like, ooh, I don't really, that doesn't feel right anymore. It doesn't have to be some dramatic, big existential crisis like some pivots are, you know, or some decisions we need to make are, you know. It can also just be getting really good at noticing how you adjust or pivot over time, and you paid attention because you knew yourself. And you were like, ooh, I know what it feels like to see myself on a website and to go, yep, and move on. And you didn't, yep, move on. You sat and said, oh, hold on. It's not right anymore.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious, in your mini pivots, many pivots over time, what have you found? What have you found to be for you? What are your clues? What are your tells for you? Right? Everybody's different, right? So you mentioned with the title, you felt it in your body. How do you know that it's time to pay attention to something?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably really the overarching statement is like, something doesn't feel right, you know, but that can certainly be very vague. I think that when we were kind of chatting previously, one of the things I recall in one of the pivots where I was moving from like in person to online, and that was more because I was moving, like I was physically moving to a different place in the country where I did not want to set up another in-person practice. Like that was really clear to me. And also, even in the work I was doing, where I was working with people, mostly single sessions. I mean, some people might buy like a package of sessions to do like a series of, sessions around body work or trauma healing. But I noticed that I really wanted to work with people for a little bit longer, like,
Mhm.
just that one session when they kind of felt like they needed something is a fine way to work, right? There's like
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. I was saying to you, like, I go to acupuncture like that. I just kind of go when I feel like I want to go, and that works
Yeah.
for me. And so I'm super grateful for practitioners who do that. But I was noticing my desire to want to like walk somebody through like more of a journey.
Mhm.
And I also felt like there were a couple of things like that felt just more fulfilling to me to be able to, walk somebody through something they were moving through, but kind of be like a partner with them in
Right.
exploring it and like getting clarity and maybe doing some interpersonal work to move through that. That felt really, really important. Um, and then also when I was like earlier in my healing journey, I had seen an acupuncturist, I had done some cranial work, I had seen an energy practitioner. I felt like I was kind of really spread out all over the place. And it was because I really wanted to feel better. Like I just really
Yes.
wasn't feeling well.
Yeah.
It's like, what can I do to like help myself not feel like this anymore, And I did multiple yoga teacher trainings and I taught yoga for 9 years. I was like, oh my God, let me do all the things to like help me
Right.
like feel better. And so I was like, I really wish I had been able to, I had someone to go to that could hold a
Yes.
container for me. Like, even if they were like, okay, we're going to go through this like mini program with you, or like we work together for 3 months or 6 months and like we do these things. And I really help you go from like A to Z. And I like that to me was like gold, and
Yes.
I did not even know to look for that, to be totally honest, but
Mhm.
I certainly, it wasn't presented to me in my journey. I was like really piecing literally everything
Everything.
together
Yeah.
myself. And I just was like, I want to be able to offer that, and I do think we heal when we have a safe container. I think we can go
Mhm.
deeper with somebody when we form that relationship. Because my focus is relationships, I think that people do heal in relationships, and whether that takes like a practitioner who has a trauma informed background and
Mhm.
can hold you in that until you feel like you can hold it yourself, like that's the work, and so that's really hard to do when you're just kind of making appointments randomly, like every
Yes. Yes.
month or every other month or whatever, because you're like in that moment, you're like, I don't feel good. Let me go talk to this person, or let me go lay on a table and like find some relief. Versus like, wow, I really have some work to do. And if I was almost like if I committed right to the
Right.
structure of I work with somebody twice a month, but for 6 months, or 3 times a month, but for whatever, whatever it is, like whatever that
Mhm.
looks like for people, you can go so much further
Yeah.
faster
Yeah.
because this person has you, they're invested in you, they like want to help you. Like I offer people support in between sessions, which I imagine you do as well, and
Yeah.
that is incredible. I have definitely, I mean, I've had clients use that more and less, and I think
Totally.
that's totally normal.
Same. Mhm.
But for the ones who have like really leaned into it, I have seen such a significant change because oftentimes, because I work with people who are highly sensitive, they've often had experiences early in life where they like weren't understood, or people just didn't know how to manage or work with their sensitive nature. They
Yes.
were called too sensitive, like they weren't really listened to, they weren't held. And it's like nothing, like we're not like trying to blame anyone's
No.
parents or anything like that. It's just like a lot of times people don't really know what to do with a sensitive kid, because like if they've never experienced it, they just don't know. And so having someone to kind of hold that place of
Mm.
like, yep, you can literally bring me anything and I will not have any judgment around it, and you can write like we use I use different things, but like at the time I was using like a Google Doc. And I mean, I remember one client, I think by the end of our time together, she must have had like 90 or 100 pages. Like,
Yeah.
and I was like, use it. That's great. Like, you need to put that in there, Like I will read it.
Yeah.
And
well, and that's so beautiful
yeah.
for the work you do too, because you are holding container for sensitive people who, I think by the nature of that, as a highly sensitive person myself, like the nature of that is that many of us did not get, because this wasn't a thing back in the day,
right,
for sure,
right.
Didn't get quote unquote understood or supported in the way that we wanted to, which welcome to humanity. But I think, or to being a human, but I think, for you to be able to hold that container, which I do as well, but I think to hold that container in a way that you didn't have, is quite powerful. And I do think so often when we do the work that we're meant to do, right? We're not just out running a business to just make a buck. We're also working to make an impact and working in our zone of genius, which is obviously what you're doing. You're embodying, who you are and what you do. Who you are and what you do is that you can handle the depth of these things. And so you created a container that supports your style and structure, right? Whereas of course you could have like done a bunch of single sessions, but that's not the magic of where you thrive. And I think to your point, like there's a deepening of that I imagine there has been a deepening of that over time, and that whether you put it out there or whether you're just simply attracting clients who are looking for that depth, I'm imagining that has deepened over time. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when that happened, that was kind of earlier on when I shifted into more of the package structure and all of that. And so I do think that just the kind of people who are even attracted to something where it is like, oh wait, we worked together for 4 months. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Or they're curious, their interest gets piqued, and they're probably looking for some kind of longer term support. And so it's a match on both ends, right? Like for someone to want to support somebody deeply, but for someone who also feels like, oh, I want to partner on this journey. And I think that kind of like to kind of circle back to your question of like the tell is like, it was really just like, what would feel like better for me, but what would also feel like better service, because I really felt like there was a gap in terms of what I had needed at the time. And I was like, I wish there were options where people didn't have to like piece it all together.
Yeah. And now there is.
And
now there is.
Yeah. And lots of, and I think that the beauty of is like I said, with my acupuncturist, like I'm so like glad that I could pop in when I want to. Like I don't necessarily want to do like deep transformational work with this one person. Like I'm happy to, when my knee feels a little swollen, I'm like, I'm gonna go see ma'am. But if I want to do like other deeper work, I'm like, I'll probably choose like another kind of practitioner. So it's all, it's all useful, but it's nice when it matches, right? Like what you want to do and like what the other person needs. So.
Yeah. And I think the longer you do the thing that you're doing, or the longer you allow yourself to be, on this journey, those things you will naturally sort of find what is most fitting for you in that moment, because there is no wrong way, right? Like you said, like your acupuncturist, the way that she structures her business model is perfect for her, and also works for you as a client. And then, but that structure, while it works, doesn't necessarily work or isn't the most ideal setup for you. And so finding that, like you said, feeling into what feels good and right. And to your point, like then that's really a true match of your magic and the impact you can make on your people.
Yeah. And I think, you as a business coach, I think would help people with this piece of like, okay, like, yep, this is what you want to do and how you want to work. And like, let's make sure it matches the need of people. Right. Like,
Yeah.
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 I think that's
It's
like a real
fulfillment and
practical,
impact,
important
right? It's
thing
like, what do you
too.
do? What, like,
Yeah.
can we find the match, or are you just going after it in this way because you think that's how you're supposed to do it, right? Because that's how,
Yeah.
a
So,
somatic practitioner does their work. Or for
mhm,
me, like, well, this is
mhm,
how business coaches work. Okay, no. This is how I work,
mhm, mhm.
has, and
Yeah.
like you said, then for the match. But yeah, that is the challenge. And I am also very obviously, like, my perspective is that you have to find that match, and it's okay if it
Mhm,
evolves into, needs to evolve and tweak over
mhm.
time. But when it's not a match, it doesn't feel good for you either. It doesn't, that's
Yeah.
when sometimes some clients come to me because, and the work we do together is we unravel from that, right? Well, I
Mhm.
am an acupuncturist, and I'm doing great, and yet I'm not loving it anymore. Like, I've sort of lost my excitement. What's happening?
Yeah.
Oh, because I'm
Mhm,
offering these single
mhm.
sessions, and I'd really like to do this work with people in a longer. Okay, well, let's
Exactly.
unravel from all the should stuff that you created, and let's just make it work
Mhm.
in a way that will allow you to thrive. And like you said, let it be a
Yeah.
match. So yeah, all of the things. Um, I really appreciate the word that you've used a couple times today, but also in the conversation that we had last week around refinement. And I think that's a
Mm.
really helpful word for people who are pivoting, because, for you, again, you've stayed somewhat in the same ballpark on the surface. If an alien looks at your business, right? Like,
Yeah.
generally the same, but not for you.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think it really is allowing those refinements to come in. We don't need to refine everything all the time for the sake of refinement, but
Yeah.
paying attention to your body, if that's what is your tell, paying attention to when something
Mhm.
doesn't quite feel right, and paying attention to, what would be more fulfilling for you, or what you wish that you had, like you said, for the impact of your
Mm.
people. Really is, those are all refinements. I feel that they are all pivots, however you want to
Mm.
call it.
Mhm.
That is how we evolve over time as people, as practitioners, as business owners, as people doing good work in the world. We've got to follow that. Right? That's
Mhm.
my thing. I just think we have to follow that. And I think your word refinement really, I don't know, there's a permission slip in there a little bit with that.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
I like that word. So
Oh,
thank you for
good.
that.
Great. Yeah.
Anything else that you want to share before we wrap up, that you've been thinking about,
Mm.
or that we didn't get to? Because we could have taken this conversation in about 200 different directions.
Yeah.
Anything else about your journey?
Yeah. I guess, as you were sort of talking about the refinement piece, what was just coming to me for maybe an exercise or thing someone could reflect on is like, what is the core thread that goes
Mhm.
through your work? And I would suspect that for most people, like that core thread is probably the same,
Yep.
because my core thread is 100% the same. Whether I knew how to articulate it, I definitely didn't know how to articulate it 10 years ago,
Right.
and barely even a year ago, really, to be totally frank.
Totally true.
But yeah, but I think that like the more we get to know our work and how we work and like really what we're doing with people, like
Mm,
at the core, I've learned the hard way that that's not always the best for marketing or messaging,
agreed.
but but that's why you have people to help you with that. If that's not your
Exactly.
thing. But I think that the core of the work, right? Like I would say it's completely stayed the same for me, even though the
Mhm.
iterations and the manifestations are different. And so yeah, I would just say that if you kind of feel like, oh, I keep pivoting or I keep doing this, like, yeah, you certainly might be, but like I would identify the core piece of that work and to see like, well, maybe that's actually been steady the whole time. And you're just like deepening into how you talk about it and how you deliver it and what you think people need. And yeah.
I love that. I love that because I think you're right. Like, even though we grow and evolve and change over time, we also are who we are. And, you know, there is a core to us. And to your point, also to our work that, you know, our gifts are our gifts. And,
yeah. It's like your
you know,
purpose is like, you've probably been working on that, refining it over time, and it looks different. You call it a pivot, and which, you know, certainly it is like right to the outside world, unless like you said, like if you're just like entering like a completely different profession and you're like, well, I just like want to change the thing completely of like what I do. But you know, it's I'm just trying, I'm just like thinking back to a couple of people that I interviewed or I had guests on my podcast, and some of them changed careers completely. Like one was a jewelry designer, and now she does like life coaching and spiritual work and energy work. But what was interesting was like her jewelry was still like a representation of somebody's essence, and now it's like she's doing in this other form. So obviously on the outside you're like, okay, those were two completely different things, but underneath it, it was like, well, she was just like expressing it in a different way. So I would really encourage people to tune into that.
I love that. I could like philosophize about that for 10 years because I think there is an argument for like, you know, even if you were to bring, like I'm thinking now about like one of my corporate jobs that made no sense for me and it made no sense for my skills, but they were super good with me when I was in graduate school. And so I worked there while I was in school and it was great. And yet, if you really look at the way that it was a meeting and event planning company, which do not give me a detail. It's a terrible fit for me. But if you look at the way they treated me and the way that I approached that work, I still approached it from the space of my gifts. And they ended up giving me like training responsibilities and like ways that I could like work. I worked with a lot of I interviewed all the candidates that came through. Like I was still doing, you know, which is not meeting and event planning, right? But like the way that the work on the outside manifests and the way that it plays out, you know, might look different, like you said, from the outside world. You know, the jewelry and the life coaching is completely different. But at the end of the day, like she was probably bringing to each of those things her own unique style and gifts and in a specific way that hasn't changed, you know, or that is sort of that core thread, to use your word. I love that. I agree with you. Like, I think it's a pivot and is it, you know, are you just really, there's a beautiful, I've got to go get the quote because I've been saying it a lot lately and I'm going to butcher it, but it's like, basically, I think it's Paulo Coelho, who is my favorite author. And he says like, isn't the journey not about becoming, but about unbecoming all the things that you weren't, you know, it's about this unraveling of, you know, and really you're just getting back. You're just becoming more you know, or without the other stuff or without the, you know, and I think that's what that makes me think of. So thank you for that. Cause I think you're right. Like, I would almost say like, is it a pivot? Yes, it is. And what is the core, to ask your question, like what is the core thread underneath can also ground you too, I think, when you're in a pivot.
Exactly.
Where the hell am I kind of thought process. There is probably some core threads in there that will keep you sane.
Absolutely.
Good. Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's a great way to end.
You're welcome.
Where can we find you? Where can people find your podcast and your work?
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you. So my podcast is called the Transform Your Relationship Podcast, and I do solo episodes and also guest episodes, and I bring in all these lovely humans who have different modalities and different ways to really get to know ourselves so that we can show up in our relationships more authentically. And my website is my full name, manishatare.com. You can also find me on Instagram at the same handle. So I'd love, if anyone wants to connect or chat, I'm happy to do that. And I also will just share this one. Well, actually, on my website, I have a masterclass called Strengthen Your Energetic Boundaries. So I'll just say for people who resonate with being highly sensitive and they're like, yep, I get what you're saying, and I kind of want to hear a little bit more about that, that's a great place to kind of to dive in and hear all about that and see, yeah, how it pertains to you and how it impacts your relationship.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
And all of the links will be below the video or in the show notes and all the things. So you can find Manisha and connect with her.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you
So
and
fun.
everything that you bring to your work and just to this journey. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Laura. Take care.